A lot of people have experienced the childhood neglect in various forms. Sometimes it's the absence of one of the parents not being there anymore. Sometimes it's a parent being present but never being connected with you as a child, or not hearing your feelings, or not hearing your emotions, or not giving you emotional support and guidance that's helpful to you, or neglected when you need some more guidance and support. Now, a lot of forms of neglect that we have, and we need to have a kind of therapy that can help us work out those feelings of neglect, to experience from being with a therapist who's not neglectful himself or herself, but who's really engaging with you and centered and focusing on hearing you and hearing your feelings and helping you resolve those issues. So if we have the new ones that really work differently than we had when we were neglecting as a child, that's a part of the retraining of our brains and our ways of functioning in the world, to have an experience that goes down a totally different road, different from the neglectful one we had as a child, but one where now we can engage in a more meaningful way, and we can learn that through working with this therapist. There are fortunately some new ways that have evolved over the last couple of decades that are much more helpful to us in overcoming that childhood neglect that we had. And many of the therapists in the past helped somewhat with that, but they just didn't really get to the programming that we had from parents who were neglectful. Because when we have that programmed in as a young child, it's like the computer we know is based on the brain. And if you have a computer that's gummed up and not working well, you go delete, 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 and then you install a new program. Now, with the last 2 decades, we have tools that are available where we can do the equivalent with our own brains. Is that we have tools where we can deactivate some of those old programmings of neglect and the pain and the suffering that we experienced as a child when we were neglected. And we deactivate those programs, then we can experience the involvement of the therapist with us and the caring and concern, and begin to let that in and assimilate it. And we can develop new habit patterns, and beliefs about what will happen. Because if I have a belief I'm always going to be rejected or neglected, then I'm going to attract that. But now the new tools are available that can allow us to deactivate those old beliefs that grew out of those experiences. And we can install positive ones, and we can attract that into our lives more as well. So that's one of the new advances of some of the newer forms of therapy in the last 2 decades. Well, one tool that grew up first was the EMDR, the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. There was a psychologist in California that learned about that. With her, she had been upset about something and gone to talk with a friend about it, and she walked back through a park to her office and still feeling upset. And there were a lot of activities going on in the park that day, and she was looking all around. And finally, she got back to the office and found out that she was feeling better. She thought, what could have made that difference? All I did was walk across the park that I'm used to. She said the one thing that was different, it was filled with a lot of activity and things were going on all around. Could it be my eye movements of going back and forth and looking around here and the left and right and so on, and up and down? And she discovered that that indeed does affect the brain. That how we're looking in different directions, it affects what's processed in the brain. And so she developed a technique called the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, and that one came out first. Then there was another psychologist in California who had gone to an acupuncturist to have some work, and he discovered their energy systems running through the body, and there are different points of the body that's a little more pronounced. And he left that quite impressed and says, we need to do this with our patients, but we can't stick needles in them. Mm-hmm. And he's the one that learned that you could touch on acupressure points or tap on them to stimulate them with the intention of focusing on what you're releasing, how you don't want to carry this pain or that fear or that loss or that judgment on the part of the parent or being ignored and so on. That he's discovered that if we stimulate those parts with the intention to release the emotion connected with that actually works, and far better than just talking about it. Because if we bring our talking and our intention and combine it with one of these approaches where you do the eye movements and get the two left and right hemispheres to process things better together through the corpus callosum, or whether you stimulate the acupressure points, that release fear or anxiety or anger or hurt and sadness and so on, that those can make a big difference in my being able to move toward taking my power back to handle those emotions and those disturbances now. Well, if I can be of help to you to identify what the problem areas are, what would be the interventions that would be most helpful to you? Uh, there are many of those I've studied, others that just specialize only in certain ones of those. And so I'd be happy to have a meeting with you to see if my approaches or my combined integrative approach is most helpful, or whether it would be someone who specialized in just one of them because the problem areas fits more within that. So I'll be glad to explore that with somebody to see what approach or combinations of approaches would be most helpful to you given the specific problem areas that you bring.